Have you ever felt like you keep attracting the wrong people into your life? No matter how hard you try, the same patterns repeat: disappointment, frustration, or even heartbreak. You might wonder, is it me? Am I just unlucky in love? But what if the problem isn't that you're not searching hard enough? What if it's that you haven't been selective enough? What if the secret to finding the right person has nothing to do with them and everything to do with you? For decades, people have chased love as if it were something to be found outside of themselves, something to win, to earn, or to stumble upon by chance. But the legendary psychologist Carl Jung offered a radically different perspective. He believed that the relationships we attract are not random, they are mirrors of our deepest beliefs about ourselves. Jung's work reveals that our unconscious mind, the hidden part of ourselves we rarely examine, shapes who we draw into our lives. If you constantly find yourself in unfulfilling relationships, settling for less than you deserve, or repeating the same painful cycles, Jung would argue that it's not bad luck. It's an invitation to look inward. At the heart of his philosophy is this truth: when you raise your standards, not just in what you accept from others, but in how you value yourself, the wrong people fade away and the right ones begin to appear. This isn't about arrogance or unrealistic expectations. It's about alignment. The more you cultivate self-awareness, self-respect, and emotional clarity, the less you tolerate what doesn't serve you. And in that space, something remarkable happens. The universe responds by bringing people who match the energy you've created within yourself. So if you're tired of the same old patterns, if you're ready to break the cycle and finally experience a love that feels right, then this is your sign. The change doesn't start with finding the right person. It starts with becoming the right person for yourself. And when you do that, everything else falls into place. Carl Jung's work offers profound insights into why we attract certain people into our lives, and how our unconscious mind plays a far greater role in love than we might realize. One of his most transformative ideas is the concept of the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves that we deny, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge. These repressed aspects, whether insecurities, past traumas, or unexpressed desires, don't just vanish, they seep into our relationships in ways we often don't recognize. Have you ever been inexplicably drawn to someone who triggered you, or found yourself frustrated by a partner's flaws, only to later realize they mirrored something within you? That's projection in action. We unconsciously seek out partners who embody the very qualities we haven't faced in ourselves, as if love were a mirror forcing us to confront what we've avoided. A person who struggles with self-discipline, for example, might resent a partner's laziness, while secretly battling their own. Until we bring these shadows into the light, we'll keep attracting relationships that highlight them, stuck in a loop of blame or dissatisfaction. This is where individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming your authentic, whole self, comes in. It's not about perfection, but about integration, embracing both your light and dark sides, your strengths and vulnerabilities, without apology. When you commit to this inner work, something remarkable happens. The people who no longer align with who you're becoming naturally drift away, while those who resonate with your truth begin to appear. Think of it like tuning a radio. As you clarify your own frequency, the static of mismatched connections fades, and the right signals come through clearly. This isn't about cutting people off arbitrarily. It's about outgrowing relationships built on old versions of yourself. A woman who once tolerated emotional unavailability, for instance, might find herself bored by partners who once intrigued her, not because they've changed, but because she has. Individuation doesn't guarantee solitude. It ensures that the connections you keep are rooted in authenticity, not fear or pretense. At the core of this transformation is self-worth, a concept often misunderstood as ego or arrogance. Jungian psychology draws a critical distinction: ego inflates, but true self-respect grounds. Raising your standards isn't about creating a checklist of superficial traits or demanding perfection from others. It's about recognizing your inherent value so deeply that you no longer entertain what diminishes it. Toxic dynamics thrive in the soil of self-doubt. When you believe deep down that you're unworthy of love, you'll unconsciously accept behaviors that confirm that belief, breadcrumbing, inconsistency, or emotional manipulation. But when you cultivate genuine self-respect, those patterns lose their grip. You stop chasing, proving, or pleading, not because you've become cold, but because you've become clear. This shift isn't about controlling others, it's about reclaiming yourself. As Jung famously warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Many people resign themselves to unsatisfying relationships, blaming bad luck or the dating pool, never realizing they've been guided by invisible scripts written in their past. The moment you bring those scripts into awareness, interrogating why you've settled, what you're afraid of, or whose approval you're really seeking, you rewrite them. And that's when everything changes. This isn't just theory, it's a lived reality for anyone who's dared to do the work. The partner who once seemed out of your league suddenly feels within reach, not because you've lowered the bar, but because you've risen to meet it. The love that once felt elusive becomes inevitable, not because the world rearranged itself, but because you did. Jung's wisdom reminds us that the quality of our relationships is never just about the other person. It's a reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves. And that's the most powerful love story you'll ever write. Why lower standards attract the wrong people? The fear of loneliness is one of the most powerful forces that keeps people trapped in relationships that don't serve them. There's an almost primal terror that arises at the thought of being alone, not just physically, but emotionally unseen, uncared for, or forgotten. This fear whispers destructive lies. This is as good as it gets, or no one better will come along, or worst of all, you don't deserve more. And so, people stay in situationships that go nowhere, in partnerships devoid of passion, in dynamics where love is conditional. What begins as a compromise hardens into a life sentence, all because the alternative, facing the unknown, sitting with oneself, feels too terrifying to confront. But here's the painful truth. Settling for less doesn't protect you from loneliness, it just makes it chronic. The ache of being with someone who doesn't truly see or value you is far more isolating than solitude ever could be. At least when you're alone, you're in honest company. The moment you realize that loneliness isn't something to outrun, but something to move through, is the moment you stop letting it dictate your choices. This dynamic becomes even more complicated when the wounded healer archetype takes over. The unconscious belief that if you pour enough love into someone else, you'll somehow heal yourself in the process. It's a seductive trap. Focusing on someone else's potential, their trauma, their need for salvation lets you avoid your own unfinished work. You tell yourself you're being compassionate, patient, loving, but beneath that noble facade often lies a hidden bargain. If I fix them, they'll finally love me the way I've always wanted. The harsh reality? You can't love someone into loving you. And you can't give someone self-worth they haven't cultivated for themselves. The wounded healer ends up exhausted, resentful, and confused when their generosity isn't reciprocated, not because they gave too much, but because they gave with strings attached. True healing begins when you turn that energy inward, when you become the project instead of the architect of someone else's transformation. We see these patterns play out in painfully predictable ways, accepting breadcrumbs instead of banquets, mistaking potential for reality, or rationalizing red flags because no one's perfect. Someone texts you just enough to keep you hooked but never enough to commit? Breadcrumbs. They're emotionally unavailable but swear they'll change someday? Potential over reality. They exhibit the same hurtful behaviors as a parent or past partner, yet you keep making excuses? Childhood patterns repeating. These aren't just bad luck. They're unconscious recreations, attempts to resolve old wounds by reliving them with new faces. The child who grew up with a distant parent might chase partners who are just out of reach, not because they enjoy the pain, but because their nervous system mistakes familiarity for safety. The brain would rather endure known misery than risk unknown joy. Breaking these cycles requires something far more courageous than hope. It demands ruthless honesty. You have to ask, what am I really getting from this? What old story am I trying to rewrite? Until you do, you'll keep signing up for the same lessons, dressed in different skins. The irony is that lowering your standards doesn't actually protect you from pain. It just changes the flavor. The sting of rejection becomes the slow burn of resentment. The fear of being alone becomes the agony of being misunderstood. But when you finally decide that you'd rather be lonely alone than lonely with someone, that's when the real shift begins. You start to see your worth not as something to be proven, but as something to be protected. And that's when the wrong people stop showing up, not because they've disappeared, but because you've stopped recognizing them as options. How raising standards changes everything. When you begin to establish clear, unwavering standards, you accomplish something remarkable. You teach people exactly how to deserve a place in your life. Boundaries aren't walls meant to keep others out. They're guideposts that illuminate the path to mutual respect. So many suffer in relationships not because they haven't communicated their needs, but because they've been unwilling to enforce them. They drop hints instead of stating truths, swallow grievances to keep the peace, and mistake accommodation for love. But here's what changes when you shift. The moment you start saying, "This is what I will accept," and mean it, the wrong people either rise to meet you or remove themselves. There's a quiet power in realizing you don't have to negotiate your worth. Whether it's refusing to engage with hot and cold behavior, walking away from disrespect, or simply no longer molding yourself to fit someone else's expectations, boundaries act as a filter. They don't just protect you, they reveal who's truly willing to meet you where you are. There's a reason the phrase, like attracts like, persists across spiritual traditions and psychological frameworks. Energy isn't just an abstract concept, it's the unspoken language of connection. When you cultivate genuine self-respect, you emit a different frequency. People who operate from manipulation, insecurity, or games begin to feel dissonant, while those who resonate with your clarity naturally draw closer. This isn't mystical thinking, it's observable reality. Have you ever noticed how confident individuals seem to command respect without demanding it? Or how those at peace within themselves attract healthier relationships? It's not that their lives are immune to challenges, it's that their internal standards create a gravitational pull toward reciprocity. The law of attraction isn't about magically manifesting perfect partners. It's about becoming someone who no longer tolerates what's out of alignment. When you stop chasing, you start attracting. So many relationships falter because they're built on performance, the versions of ourselves we think will be loved rather than the truth of who we are. But the right person isn't looking for a polished facade, they're waiting to recognize themselves in your realness. Think about it. The most profound connections in your life likely came when you least expected them, often when you were simply being yourself without agenda. That's because authenticity acts as a homing signal. The more you shed people-pleasing, the more space you create for someone who genuinely fits. No more contorting yourself to fit someone else's mold, no more dimming your light to avoid outshining their insecurities. When you show up as you are, flaws, passions, quirks, and all, you give others permission to do the same. And in that space, something extraordinary happens. Love becomes less about possession and more about recognition. Jung's observation that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed, captures the heart of this shift. Raising your standards isn't about control, it's about creating the conditions for a reaction worth having. When two people meet from a place of wholeness rather than lack, the relationship becomes a crucible for growth rather than a cage of need. You begin to understand that love isn't about finding someone to complete you, but about choosing someone to evolve with. The right person won't just fit into your life as it is, they'll inspire you to become more yourself than you ever thought possible. And that's the ultimate testament to the power of standards. They don't just change who walks into your life, they change who you become in the process. This is the paradox few talk about. The journey to finding the right person is never about them. It's about the person you dare to become along the way. When you commit to that becoming, everything else follows, not by chance, but by consequence. Practical steps to raise your standards. The journey to raising your standards begins with courageous self-reflection, the kind that requires you to sit with your past and interrogate it without judgment. Start by examining your relationship patterns through journaling, asking yourself uncomfortable but necessary questions. Why have I tolerated certain behaviors in the past? What unresolved wounds might be attracting these dynamics? This isn't about blaming yourself, it's about reclaiming agency. Jung's shadow work teaches us that the traits we dislike in others often reflect disowned parts of ourselves. For example, if you're consistently drawn to emotionally unavailable partners, explore where you might be withholding love from yourself. If you attract people who disrespect your boundaries, consider where you've learned to abandon your own needs. This process isn't about dwelling on the past, it's about illuminating it so you can break free. Write freely, then look for recurring themes. You'll often find that your relationship struggles are echoes of older stories waiting to be rewritten. Once you've identified these patterns, the next step is to define what you will accept moving forward, your non-negotiables. These aren't superficial preferences like height or hobbies, but the foundational qualities that determine whether a connection will nurture or deplete you. Emotional standards might include honesty, empathy, or the capacity for healthy conflict. Intellectual standards could involve curiosity, stimulating conversation, or shared values. Spiritual standards, whether secular or religious, might encompass alignment on life purpose, integrity, or growth mindsets. The key is specificity. Instead of, "I want someone kind," ask, "What does kindness look like in action?" Maybe it's someone who remembers your coffee order during stressful times or apologizes sincerely after a disagreement. This list isn't a rigid checklist for others, it's a compass for you. When you're clear on your standards, decision-making becomes effortless. You'll no longer waste time deciphering mixed signals. You'll recognize misalignment early and walk away with clarity, not regret. But here's the truth most miss. Raising your standards isn't just about selecting better partners, it's about becoming one. The traits you desire in others are clues to who you're meant to grow into. If you crave a partner who's emotionally present, cultivate presence within yourself. If you value ambition, pursue your own goals with passion. This isn't about perfection, it's about alignment. You'll often find that the frustrations you've had with past partners mirror areas where you've neglected your own growth. For instance, if you've resented partners for being indecisive, check where you've been passive in your own life. By embodying the qualities you seek, you accomplish two things. You attract people who resonate with your energy, and you enter relationships from wholeness rather than lack. Love stops being something you need and becomes something you choose, a profound shift that changes everything. Of course, none of this works if fear still holds the reins. Letting go isn't about suppressing anxiety, it's about acting in spite of it. Every time you enforce a boundary, every time you walk away from what's familiar but unfulfilling, you're proving to yourself that you can survive the discomfort of the unknown. Fear will whisper, "What if nothing better comes along?" Counter it with truth. Better than what? Then settling. Trust isn't blind faith, it's the gradual confidence built from seeing how your life improves when you honor your standards. The more you practice this, the more you'll notice a quiet transformation. The wrong people will seem to fade from your orbit, not because the universe magically removed them, but because you stopped responding to their frequency. Space creates possibility. And in that space, something remarkable emerges. The kind of love that feels less like a desperate grasp and more like a homecoming. This is the heart of it all. Raising your standards is the ultimate act of self-respect. It's not a one-time decision but a daily practice. A commitment to valuing yourself so deeply that compromise no longer feels like an option. Start small. Maybe today you delete that old Flames number. Maybe tomorrow you speak up when something doesn't feel right. Each choice is a brick in the foundation of the life and love you're building. And one day, you'll look back and realize, the right person didn't just appear. You became ready for them. The most profound truth about love is this: your relationships have always been a mirror. They reflect back to you, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, where you stand in your own journey of self-worth. Every person who has come into your life, every heartbreak that has reshaped you, every moment of connection or disappointment has been part of a larger conversation between you and your own evolution. When you raise your standards, not just in love, but in how you treat yourself, the universe has no choice but to respond in kind. The right people begin to appear not because the world has changed, but because you have. You stop attracting who you want and start attracting who you are. So now, the question isn't, will the right person come? It's, what will you do to become ready for them? Transformation begins with a single choice. Which standard will you commit to today? Is it the courage to walk away from what no longer serves you? The discipline to stop settling for breadcrumbs? The self-respect to demand the love you've been giving away so freely to others? Whatever it is, declare it, not just to yourself, but to the world. Write it down. Share it in the comments below. Let this be the day you stop waiting for love to change and start being the change you seek. As Carl Jung reminds us, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. The love you've been searching for has always been closer than you realized, not in someone else's arms, but in your own awakening. So dare to look within. Dare to demand more, not just from others, but from yourself. Because the greatest love story you'll ever write isn't the one where you find the right person. It's the one where you become them. Thank you for watching, and remember, the love you deserve is already on its way. All you have to do is meet it at the level you've created. See you in the comments.